John Whitehead is our next speaker. He's an attorney and author who's written widely about constitutional law, human rights, and popular culture. His most recent books include the best-selling Battlefield America, The War on the American People, and the award-winning A Government of Wolves, The Emerging American Police State. He's filed numerous amicus briefs before the U.S. Supreme Court and has been co-counsel in several landmark Supreme Court cases. In 1982, John established the Rutherford Institute, a nonprofit civil liberties and human rights organization located in Charlottesville, Virginia. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome John Whitehead.
Thank you very much, sir.
Wait, I got a clap for you. How about this?
Okay.
They like you. All right. John, how are you doing tonight?
Really busy with all the stuff that's going on around the country, you know, because we file a lot of lawsuits and help a lot of people legally. I raise money, by the way. We're a nonprofit as well, and we get lawyers and bring them in. They donate their time. We pay the legal expenses. But, you know, I'm going to talk about some of those cases we had with the police state that has really emerged since 9/11. But, yeah, we do a lot of writing at our website at rutherford.org. I do a weekly commentary, which, by the way, is heavily footnoted, and we try to get the information out. My motto is education precedes action, and Americans need to get educated, and they're not going to get it by watching mainstream media, by the way.
Oh, just think if we could, though. I mean, what would it be like if the mainstream media told the truth about everything? What kind of world would we be living in?
I think you'd be living in one without entertainment, because mainstream media is entertainment. And now I think most people, I've been screaming about this for years. I feel like a lone wolf on a ledge going, wake up, open your eyes, open your eyes. Your mind is useless if your eyes are blind. And trying to getting people to see this. And, you know, Daniel, I mean, a lot of things that your former speaker just talked about, I've talked about as well, but just seeing the so-called deep state. I've studied the history of this country, and the deep state and a lot of things that were your former guest talking about goes back into the 40s. I've seen it through the FBI, and we can talk about some of that. We need to talk about the development of the so-called police state in this country, but actually it emerged very strongly in the 1950s, if you remember the McCarthy era. So,
all right, well, I'm going to let you have the floor, and we consumed already part of your time, so go on ahead until the top of the hour. The floor is yours, my friend. Thank you for coming to speak to us.
Thank you, sir. Well, what I'd like to talk about now is we have a police state, and people say, what's a police state? Well, it's police state is something where the government watches you all the time. You can get shot in the middle of the night. You can get taken away to a camp somewhere where your family can't see. And under the National Defense Authorization Act, that has actually happened. Presidents can name someone an extremist, and they're gone. They don't get to see their family or get a lawyer. In some of the cases we've been involved in. But if you've heard the phrase the deep state, I was one of the first people to talk about it, by the way, back in 2015 when the FBI memo was leaked saying there was a seventh floor group underneath Washington, D.C. that ran everything. And once you had the U.S. Patriot Act, which it was just belched out after 9/11, it was 342 pages. It was passed in a little over a month. The Congress admitted they did not read it, which allowed sneak and peek searches where the government could come into your home and while you weren't there, download stuff off your computer, do whatever they want to do, and leave without even getting a warrant. National security letters under this, where the FBI or some government agent shows up at your university, your bank, your business, and your employer, if they go see your employer to get information on you, they're prohibited from telling you or anybody that the government was there watching you. And this is just the tip of the tiny iceberg I'm talking about here. This is just a few of the things that we've seen develop. But what happened with 9/11 and the U.S. Patriot Act, and again, I'm a constitutional lawyer. Looking at it, I was shocked when I first saw this thing was passed, and no one except a few senators even said anything about it, is it turned the FBI, and when the Department of Homeland Security was erected right after that too, by the way. And by the way, I had a former NSA agent who read my books and came to visit me, and he said, John, we're using the Soviet model. And I did not know what he was talking about. He said, Homeland Security, man. He said, Homeland Security, all these terms you're going to hear, it's the Soviet model. And there's a few more Soviet models I want to talk about in some of the cases I've seen. But we have secret police. They read everything on our computers now. There's nothing that the government doesn't see. They're doing geofencing warrants now in many areas, where if a crime's committed and you happen to be in the radius that they pick, a warrant can be issued for your arrest. And there have been many citizens arrested, and all they have been is somewhere in the area. So they're watching even that with companies like Google. And under the Obama administration, 3 memos were prepared, and they were directives from the Obama administration called Right-Wing Extremism, Left-Wing Extremism, and Operation Vigilant Eagle. There were 3 memos directed at certain groups that needed to be watched. They were considered extremists. But the thing, when you read the memos, and I've written on this, you can go to our website and read about it. The memos use the words extremist and terrorist interchangeably. Incredibly, in left-wing extremists, the government is supposed to watch and maybe round up in times of distress, was PETA, the animal rights group and stuff like that. Veterans were mentioned in the right-wing extremism, returning veterans as a danger. And then there was Operation Vigilant Eagle, which the government focuses on returning veterans from Afghanistan, Iraq, and watches them. I've met with many of those men and had a case, and maybe many of you have heard of this case. It was been talked about a lot. It was the Brandon Robb case that happened in 2012. Brandon Robb was a returning Marine from Afghanistan. He was a decorated Marine. He took weapons away from Al-Qaeda. He defused mines for the fellow troops. Did a lot of really neat things. Decorated, came back, and on a Saturday morning in Richmond, he had just gotten through jogging. He lived right outside of Richmond, Virginia, in August of 2012. He heard some noises outside. He was at home typing. He had his own home business. And all of a sudden, he heard the noises outside and running, stamping boots and stuff. He looked outside. There were people in black outfits, the outfits the FBI, Department of Homeland Security agents wear, a lot of them, with little ties, a SWAT team running up to his home. He goes up to his door, and this man did not own a weapon, by the way, and they knew that. They had trouble getting a warrant to get in his house. He walked to the door. He said, the most dangerous thing I had, John, was my paring knife, which I cut my fruit up with. He opens the door, and the agents run up and said, we need to talk to you. And he said, well, what do you need to talk to me about? And they said, we're concerned about your Facebook post. He was attacking Obama, saying that Obama should be put in prison for his executive orders. He was playing a private Facebook game with his sister and his brother named, was it Mr. Illuminati, I think the game was called. It was one of those conspiracy things that, again, we all talk about now, those of us who have half a brain. And he was a 9/11 truther. They said, you just need to step outside and we'll talk a second. He stepped outside his door. Remember, it's a decorated Marine. He's like 6'4". They grabbed him. He didn't have a shirt on. He just got through jogging. They handcuffed him. He's going, what are you doing? They took him out, and thank God some people filmed it. They took him out, and that's how we found out after his mother called us as well. But they take him out, the police, and they slam his back against a fence, cutting it all the way down, by the way. This guy's done nothing wrong. They put him in the police car, take him to the police station. He asked for bandages because it hurt. They put one of those prison shirts on. He said it hurt so bad, it stuck in the cut. He had a 5-minute examination with a psychiatrist who ruled that he had mental issues. Among other things, he was a 9/11 truther. That was one of his big mental issues. He had another small court hearing with a 70-year-old judge. They brought in all the social workers and psychiatrists, and he was sentenced to a mental hospital, a veterans mental hospital, and was going to be there probably indefinitely. His mother called me crying on the phone. I didn't know much about the issue, and I looked it up, and it's called civil commitments. He was civilly committed in this mental institution. And about 2 hours and 2.5 hours from his home, there was one much closer, but they moved him so his mother and his sister and family couldn't see him. And he was locked there. We filed a lawsuit immediately in the county court, but he called me one Thursday and said, John, he was in the mental hospital. He says, the doctor here is going to force meds on me. What do I do? and it was a psychiatrist doing it. And the psychiatrist was listening on the phone. I said, you tell the psychiatrist, when this case is over, I'm going to sue him because you cannot force medications without a court order on people. They did not have a court order to do it. And we filed a lawsuit, and a judge ruled he shouldn't have been in there in the first place. But what I learned during all of this was, believe it or not, it kind of blew my mind at the time, because I knew about civil commitments, but there's 20,000 alone annually in Virginia that people are, where he was at, committed civilly like this. 1.5 million annually. I had reporters around the country calling me, freaking out, saying, John, it's worse than you think. And these were from LA, these are from the big newspapers and stuff. 1.5 million people annually put away in these institutions. This is America, 1.5 million people. And most organizations won't help these people legally. I did it because it sounded so incredibly crazy. And he's out now, and that's great, living a productive life. But we've had other cases where decorated troops are, this is because the government's watching everything they're doing, we're doing, just make comments about airplanes flying. One fellow, another decorated Marine, someone texted him and asked him what was all the helicopters doing over a local mountain. He said, well, it simulates the mountains in Afghanistan and Iraq. I read the paragraph. It was just a paragraph, 3 sentences. That's all he said. The next day, 2 NSA agents showed up at his door in their little black suits and pistols, and threatened. They said if he ever did that again, they were going to deport him. They were going to take him out of the country. He came into my office crying. And I said, no, we got it. We sent a letter telling them we knew all about this and we were going to sue them if they ever showed up at the door again. But this is happening to people across the country. And this is the so-called deep state, the so-called government that we operate under. But here's another thing most people don't understand. What the deep state is. I mean, I ask people that question. They say, well, we're under the deep state. I say, what's the deep state? And they kind of look at me. Well, I've studied it and I've written on it. To give you a little update on it, the government we have is not the government you think we have. It's not a representative government. In 2014, Princeton with Northwestern University did an in-depth study of 1,800 policies and laws passed in Washington, D.C. in the 20 years before. They came to the conclusion that we live in a moneyed elite run by 585 billionaires in conjunction with the key players in the federal government. And that's the so-called deep state. It's the fusion of corporate interests with the government, what you might call the corporate state, the corporate elite, and they're there basically to make money. And to give you a quote, I'm going to read you a quote from the study. It's just 2 sentences, but listen to this from the professors. The central point that emerges from our research is that economic elites and organized groups representing business interests have substantial independent impacts on U.S. government policy, while mass-based interest groups and average citizens have little or no independent influence in the government. And then they go on to say, when a majority of citizens disagrees with the economic elites and or with organized interests, they generally lose. Moreover, because of the strong status quo bias built into the U.S. political system, even when fairly large majorities of Americans favor policy change, they generally do not get it. That's who runs the government. It's money, folks. And they're increasingly seeing us as data bits, and I will talk to a minute if I have time within my hour, about how once artificial intelligence takes over, there's going to be some real problems. And Google is predicting that by 2029, completely taking over the internet. There was another study that in conjunction with this that establishes something further I've seen. And you're talking to somebody that sued the president of the United States and won a case. I've been suing it out of Washington for 40 years. Washington, D.C. is the most corrupt place I've ever operated in. And Ryan Murphy, an economist at Southern Methodist University, published a recent study on where psychopaths gather, the predominance of psychopaths. He went through each state and ranked them. Guess who ranked first in collection of psychopaths? I'm sure you're getting the point now. Washington, D.C. He said that it measured more than any environment when he looked at the politics and how things were dealt with, which were psychopaths who have antisocial traits. They have no empathy for people. They don't care about people. They don't care about the welfare of others. They care about money. And that's basically it. So what we're up against when you say, I'm going to go vote for this guy or that guy, and I'm going to throw him out of office or whatever, who you're not going to throw out is the people running the government. Excuse me. Which is this so-called deep state that, I mean, most of the bills, folks, that they pass in Congress are written by large corporations who get paid for it. And recently, more than 2,100 laws that were passed into actual laws that became laws of our land were written by large corporate interests. And they spend the money like there is no money. They don't care. You realize our national debt now is $27 trillion and growing. In a couple of years, maybe over $70 trillion. We have economists now predicting the government is going to go into a massive depression pretty soon. And the point is, while all these people are getting rich off of us and running the government and funding militarized police, SWAT team raids, and all the things we're seeing, the average American spends more money on food, clothing, and healthcare, spends more money on taxes than food, clothing, and healthcare. That's where most Americans are at. They don't care about the average American, and they have all the money. Youth suicides are zooming in the country, suicides among veterans, and I've worked with a lot of veterans, by the way, who suffer from these issues. They come back and see the country they supposedly defend and say, this is not what I saw. And I actually had a top decorated military person come and meet with me who said he finally got out of the army because he got sick and tired of going by the opium fields in Afghanistan and seeing them surrounded by American troops guarding them. He said, John, we're being fooled. We're being fooled. All they want is our money and control. And they're nervous about, well, again, there's other things I'm saying. They're nervous about the so-called police state. They're nervous about where things are headed. And I've written about this. There is a 2030 video, it's called. It was put out by the Pentagon a couple years ago. It's called Megacities, Urban Future, and Emerging Complexity. It's about 5 minutes long, done by Hollywood Computer. We don't know who the Hollywood Computer is. I mean, Hollywood director. He may be a computer, but a Hollywood director. And it basically prophesies by 2030, this country is going to go smashing down, and other cities in the world. New York is pictured on the video, and the military is now going to have to establish martial law. And most people don't know this. Right now, it's being done. ICE, the immigration Corps of the federal government, is building a simulated village for $1 million at Fort Benning, Georgia, where I trained, by the way. I'm a former infantry officer. We'll have cities like Chicago, Arizona, I mean, buildings and surroundings where they're going to train against American citizens in case of an emerging complexity, as they call it. So they're getting ready for something they're seeing. And with the things that I'm seeing and I'm really concerned about is the 80,000 SWAT team raids we're seeing happening across the country every year. The military, people going through doors, the police. There were 3,000 annually SWAT team raids in America in the 1980s. Today, there are 80,000 annually and growing, where people are getting shot, up to 500 dogs a day. They shoot whatever, and they go in the room, first of all. They shoot poodles, whatever. Kids have been getting shot. There was a little girl in Detroit. The police did a SWAT team raid. They went up her building into a window, busted in, shot the guns. One shot a little girl laying on the couch. She started bleeding. She fell over dead. She had her princess blanket on. She was 10 years old. Her father came out of the bedroom screaming. And what's this? What are you doing? And they slammed him face down in her blood. You know what? They were in the wrong place. 80,000 of these SWAT team raids, by the way, are for mere warrant service, where a policeman used to show up at your door and knock on your door. But now they're terrorizing Americans across the country. Jose Guerrero, decorated Marine, by the way, Arizona. The police were doing a SWAT team raids in his area looking for marijuana in people's homes. In the middle of the night, they burst through his door. He grabbed his wife and kids. When you hear that, they do flashbang grenades and boom and disorient you in the middle of the night. He was a decorated Marine. He had the sense to push his wife and kid behind him in the closet. He stood at the end of his hallway with the only rifle he had, his hunting weapon. The police fired 71 times, okay? 71 times. Killed him. He fell forward. The safety had never come off his weapon, by the way. He didn't fire. And guess what? No marijuana was found in his home. SWAT team raids. And when I just talked about the mainstream media, no, you don't hear about these things in the mainstream media. We should be shocked. SWAT team raids happening across the country like that. And we're allowing it as American citizens and saying, this is okay. We're going to do this. What's happened to the American police state as we're seeing it, and it's grown really stronger after, like I said, 9/11 with all the legislation that's been given and power been given to the government and the police and all the militarized weapons. It's predictive policing. They're watching everything you're doing. Policemen are doing safety watch lists in their local towns, little small towns of 5,000 people, and they're watching people. They're being trained by the FBI. And their SWAT team raids, by the way, are trained by the military, many of them, and they act like the military. And I've talked to former people who have actually taught in the police academies, and they tell me that the thing that concerns them, they quit actually working in those academies, is because they said these are no longer civil police. They're treating people in the combat mode, and they're training all the police now in what's called the worst case scenario. In other words, if an old lady's walking down the street and she pulls her cell phone out real quick, the worst case scenario is she might have a gun. People have been shot holding a cell phone, and the police have told them to stop. Shooting somebody through the window just recently, I think it was Pennsylvania. There was a Second Amendment advocate. The police actually circled around his home, looked at him through the window. He was sleeping with his girlfriend, and they shot him dead in his bed. He didn't do anything wrong. And he wanted to protest. His family wanted to protest what happened to him. It was during the pandemic, and the town fought it. We jumped in and said, no, let those people protest. And so this is what's happening today. They're watching all of us, by the way, with what we see happening with what the internet is giving to them. Google, everything that you do on Google, they categorize and they give it to police, they give it to ICE agents, they give it to FBIs, they have contracts with the NSA, they work with the FBI. All this information is given over to the police. So everybody in the United States now has a file. And the Department of Homeland Security, by the way, is doing threat assessments on all homes across America. They go from the color green to the color red. If you own a weapon, it's red. If you have a criminal record or whatever, it can be a yellow. But people have asked me in the cases we've been involved in, a few very strange cases where police show up real agitated, they have all this information on their screen devices. And they're ready to go in the worst case scenario. And that's why you're seeing all these shootings. It's the training. I'll be honest with you, it's very poor training, by the way, when you have policemen that are acting like combat troops and treating us like, we're enemy combatants. And that's what's happened. The old theory was that we were the masters and the government agents were our servants. I used to see serve and protect on the 5 police cars. Most of the time when I see police cars today, I don't see any of them. That's all gone. And there's a different attitude that's been put into these people. Remember, the Constitution starts with 3 words, really important words. We, the people of the United States. What's that mean? We are the government. Supposedly, the people in Congress are our representatives. But as I'm showing you, underneath them are all this money and the lobbyists and the people who run the government. And they don't really care at all about us or our lives or what we can do and how we can do it. They want, again, to control. And there's a paranoia, and we're seeing it through that Mega Cities video that the Pentagon did of the 2030 collapse of government in this country. And it could happen quicker with what we're seeing. And Under different regulations now, the government's watching palm prints, your breathing. The Department of Homeland Security is putting cameras in city lights across the country. License plate readers are on police cars. They can pick up over 3,000 images a minute driving down the road, all these police cars. It's all collected by the government, and they can track wherever you've been. Some people have gone to political rallies, have come home, and the police are waiting for them at certain political rallies, like anti-government things, conspiracy theorist things that they don't like, and they're waiting on them, and they're watching them, and we're getting those cases. I mean, it's not. I mean, we had a sort of a shock jock who attacked Hillary Clinton a couple years ago, and he went home that night, and on his door, hanging on his door, was one of these plastic rings, and it said FBI investigation. We're investigating you. Please report to us tomorrow. And he called us, and we wrote a letter and told him to back off. You don't do that. We'll talk to you first. And standing up to them. And that's basically what you have to do. But again, predictive policing is where the government's headed in everything. If you've not seen the movie Minority Report or read some of Philip K. Dick's books, his science fiction books, where he predicted all that, yeah, the government is looking to track us wherever we go and whatever we do. They want to control us. And as John Carpenter, the fellow who's done some pretty good movies, They Live, Escape from New York, Escape from LA, and stuff like that, predicting the kind of government we've seen, he said once, I finally realized what the government wants from us. It wants our money so they can spend it on their trips, their vacations, and all the things they do. The average congressman on Capitol Hill works about 2 days a week. 3 days a week, they're basically in phone booths raising money for the next campaign. I've been told this by people who actually work with them, and they're shocked. I had a leading writer who quit his publication and went to work for some congressman on a committee. And about 2 weeks after he was working there, he called me. He said, John, your next book should be The Evil Corporations That Run Washington, D.C. And that's what we have. And they want to protect themselves. So how are they doing it? They've built a standing army on American soil. What do I mean by that? George Washington said, whatever you do not have a standing army on American soil. We face that. And that's what we have today with our militarized police. The Department of Homeland Security has handed out, and many people have seen it, all the military equipment that they've got. And it first was like, we're donating this to the local police so they'll have all these things. And we'll talk about some of the things in just a second. But come to find out, over half of that was new equipment bought from large corporations. And I bet some of those large corporations are involved in the deep state that we're talking about. They've given out Stingray devices to local police. What are Stingray devices? They're small little boxes that sit in a policeman's car. They can put in front of your home and download everything on your computer and your cell phone and drive off. They've given dirt boxes to local policemen to put in Cessnas. They're much like the Stingray devices. They fly over areas in their circles, and they're, again, tracking everything you're doing on your cell phone, your locations, working through Google, and everything, getting the same kind of information. The Department of Homeland Security has set up fusion centers across the country. There are about 73. And they are centers that work with the military, FBI, NSA, CIA, and Google and Amazon and groups like that, feed information into them from our posts, our emails, and those things. And they create a file on you, study you, a threat assessment, and that's how those dirt box works. When I see Cessnas flying over in circles now, give me a little bit, I'm a little paranoid. License plate readers, which I've already talked about. Grenade launchers. Most police departments have grenade launchers now. They have military aircraft. They have MRAPs, which are basically tanks on tires. Again, I'm a former military officer. Sniper rifles, sniper scopes. They have facial recognition cameras, not only on themselves, but now they actually fit on the dogs' backs, by the way. Dogs have facial recognition cameras, the police dogs. And it's amazing how they've involved a lot of churches. They have clergy response teams. About 20,000 pastors have been trained and supposedly recruited to calm the population and encourage them to obey if martial law is declared. One of the most amazing things, again, being a former infantry officer, that concerned me when I saw all this happening was when the Department of Homeland Security purchased 1.6 million hollow point bullets to pass out to their agents. When I was in the military, you weren't allowed to use them. You know what a hollow point bullet is, and many of you probably do, when it expands on contact. Martin Luther King's head was blown off by a hollow point bullet. John F. Kennedy's head, hollow point bullet. John Lennon, the Beatle, got 5 in the chest, hollow point bullets. Usually by government agents use those. But they just purchased not too long ago, about 5 years ago, 1.6 hollow point bullets. The department, believe it or not, the Department of Agriculture has over 300,000 hollow point bullets in SWAT teams. Social Security Administration has SWAT teams and 200,000 hollow point bullets. SWAT teams across the country, hollow point bullets. And now there are over 175, listen to this, 175,000 federal agents armed to the teeth, SWAT team gear that circle around the country and move and have the power to arrest. And what did George Washington say? Do not have a standing army on American soil. We've got it, folks. And we're not going to get rid of it, in my opinion, unless we do some things locally, which is where I would point people to. But I mean, you have the National Defense Authorization Act, which I've talked about, which allows the president to say that guy may be an extremist, and they drag you away into a camp and you're gone. And the FEMA camps, which people have joked about saying they don't really exist. Well, the Halliburton Corporation was given $385 million to build them across the country, where people would be rounded up in times of immigration problems or national distress. So do I think they exist? I had a former NSA agent tell me that they do exist on military bases. The government has a internet-based file called Main Core, which has at least 8 million names on it of people who will be rounded, they call dissidents, who will be rounded up in times of distress. So that is the police state. And it's something that I've fought for years. I've written books about it. It's the police technology that local police have now. I mean, and they work closely with the FBI. They work closely with NSA, Amazon recognition door devices. Amazon works with local police in building databases, facial recognition databases. And by the way, DNA databases with the FBI, who has a huge, monstrous DNA database, which they do familia database. They can look back in your family and see if you have somebody in your family that may be angry or whatever, or was a criminal at one time. And based on your DNA, they're trying to predict whether or not you will be a criminal. This is not tomorrow. This is today. All the futuristic movies that people talked about, all those futuristic movies have come true. Everything Orwell talked about has come true. Aldous Huxley, Philip K. Dick, and some of the great movie directors that have made the movies about. And that's where we're at today. And the crazy thing about it all is you would hope that somewhere, someone in our education systems would be speaking truth about these things. But we don't see a lot of that. We do a lot of cases in the public schools. Besides resource officers, by the way, in the public schools, the Department of Homeland Security is putting undercover marshals in schools throughout the country. They're training administrators how to identify a possible rebellious or extremist student. They're watching our children. At the same time, this is amazing, they're not teaching anything about the Constitution generally. I talk to law students today. In my summer intern programs, and law students I work through the years who do research and work with me, most of them cannot tell me what's in the First Amendment. They cannot tell me what's in the Fourth Amendment. They're not taught the Bill of Rights. They don't know what's in the Constitution. They've stopped teaching the Declaration of Independence in most schools. They're not going to teach a lot of history in schools now because that may be racist or whatever. We're seeing the crazy cases. There was one that happened just about a week ago. Dangerous stuff, especially with this new virtual education in the public schools. There was a young man named Israel Elliott, 12 years old, in Colorado. During a virtual education class, he was sitting on a couch. He moved his Nerf gun back, and like if he was looking down, and moved his little Nerf gun, called the Zombie Killer, by the way. It was green and black. The school called the police. They rushed to the home. I mean, with the SWAT team raised today and people, his parents freaked out totally. And I mean, he could have gotten killed. I mean, there's all kinds of cases where young people have been shot in homes now with police rushing to the door. All they had to do was email or call the parents, but they're watching. So what happens is, and as Orwell predicted, the schools are, with this virtual education becomes the thing, and we have some big names like Bill Gates that are pushing it. He said with virtual education, what do we need schools for? You're going to have the schools as the basic thought police for our children, and that's where it's headed. And we've got kids today that are afraid to say words in school. They don't talk about history, and we're losing what would be the key things that some of the great thinkers of history are being eradicated out of everything. 1984 is being thrown out of some schools, and other great books. So what I see coming down the pike is basically people that are not educated in the basic facts of history. And Orwell said this, I'm going to read a George Orwell quote. He said, "He who controls the past controls the future. He who controls the future controls the present." So what he's saying is, if you can manipulate things around, writers, thinkers, and stuff like that, and control what people are going to see in the future, you're going to control the present. That's what we're seeing happening in the country today. And to me, it's very scary. And so people often ask me, is there any solutions? Again, I say this: get educated. Education precedes action. The people running Washington, D.C., in my opinion, do not listen to a word you say. As I quoted the Princeton University study, they do not care what you have to say. And even if you say it, you're probably going to lose it unless you can get into massive movements. And some people that have been irritants, like Martin Luther King. They don't make it to old age. So what can you do, I think, realistically in your community? If you come to me and say, well, my vote, I'm going to say sorry. What I would do is get into your local city councils, which they're taking corporate money too. If you're talking to someone who's involved in those cases too. Money pervades everything. As Bob Dylan said, money doesn't talk, it swears. It swears. And it does swear. It tears up things. It takes away people's empathy. They start working for money and not their constituents. Get some really good people who want to help their community, who have empathy for people, who want to reduce taxes in their local community, who want to use the 10th Amendment to nullify acts of Congress and federal laws, which you can do, folks. You just have to read your Constitution. When I raised the 10th Amendment, some people, they look at me like, what's that? These are older folks. And I'm telling people, teach your kids in your home the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. Teach them about what it means to be a real freedom fighter. James Madison, who wrote the Bill of Rights, said this: "We ought to mistrust all those in power." I say that's the first principle of a patriot. If you trust the government, you're ridiculously silly. Do not trust the government. Become the government. Get down to your local city council. As I've seen in the past, one man with a sign at the city council meeting is considered a weirdo. 3 with the same sign is considered a movement, and they start listening. 20, 30, you can change the world, folks. And that's what I'm telling people to do. Get off your butts. Listen, the average American watches 150 hours of television a month. Hey, give freedom 1/3 of those hours and fight to save your local communities and start kicking the people's butts in Washington, D.C.
Wow. There you heard it, you guys. And from the mouth, a government of wolves, John Whitehead. I've got 2 of these books to give away, John. You don't mind if I do that?
No, that's okay.
You guys, if you want this book, I'll give it to the first 2 of you who email me your name and the word wolves to me at contact us at ae911truth.org. And the rest of you can buy it on Amazon if you're too late for that. John, we've got a question for you, a bunch of them actually. One, how much of these problems that you've been showing us about the federalization of the police have been due to the false flag event that we know of as 9/11?
Oh, it really got its impetus there, you know, the militarized police, yes. And when I was growing up, by the way, my next door neighbor was a local cop, local police chief, and his name was Scotty. I remember one day he walked out, he never carried a pistol. And I said, "Hey, Scotty, how come you don't carry a gun?" He looked at me and says, "I don't want to shoot anybody, John." He got in his car and drove off. You don't see that today, that kind of mentality, because in the police academies, they're teaching them to be militarized. Well, you know, the outfits they wear, the Kelvar helmets, the vests, the boots, the black outfits. Black is the color of authority, by the way. Blue is not. Brown is not. Policemen used to dress in blue and brown outfits. Today they dress like Nazis. They really do. It's the Nazi outfits. But the Nazis wore black. It scares people. Wait, does Darth Vader wear blue or brown? He wears black. So that it tells people, whoa, back up, military gun. I'm afraid of the police. And I'm going, wait a minute. You're the taxpayer. You're paying their salary and you're afraid of them? That's idiotic. And so in your local communities, I mean, some communities have actually moved that military equipment out of their communities. They've got it out. They've rushed into the political council meeting and said, "You're going to hear from us forever. Stop the SWAT team raids unless they're exigent circumstances." They're doing SWAT team raids now for pot. You're kidding me. You know why they do it? They get federal grant money for it. I talked to a good police chief not too long ago, and I was telling him, I said, "Man, the marijuana thing is stupid." He said, "But John, that's what funds my SWAT teams. It's the pot raids."
That's like writing tickets funding the police department.
Well, you know, recently in Virginia, they've been landing in their helicopters. People have tomato gardens. They're landing and terrorizing people. One guy said it was like a combat zone. He didn't have any marijuana. They landed in New York and smashed down a fence. Their helicopter took off, and no one knew what police department they were. That's happening all across the country. 80,000 SWAT team raids. So it's not going to get any better unless you stop it in your local communities. You can stop it. See here, the system wants you to think everything is happening in Washington, D.C., but you're spending a lot of tax money locally. You can change it, folks, but you have to get up off your butt and do it.
Right on. Hey, somebody wanted to know, John, what was the title of the 2014 Princeton report about the elites and the deep state?
I do not have that right in front of me, but if you go to our website, I've written on it. It's there.
Website is rutherford.org. Rutherford.org. Speaking of that, John.
That's a good report, by the way. It's very thorough report. It nails basically who runs the government. Yeah, it's money, but I knew that before. I mean, it doesn't take a lot. You know, that you talk about lobbyists and stuff. And when I first filed some lawsuits in Washington, D.C., I remember a congressman took me aside and said, "Look down that street. That's 14th Street." And I said, "It is?" He said, "No, it's Corporation Street." And he laughed. And I went, "Oh, the lobbyist." He goes, "Yeah, that's who runs the powers in Washington, D.C.
Do you think we can have a more original constitutional way of doing things in this country without getting rid of controlling bodies such as political parties and media monopolies, not to mention the federalized police?
Well, I'll go back and say what I just said. You can vote for the guy running for president, but let me tell you, the deep state chooses who's basically going to run for president. And let me say this. When I go to the drugstore, if I got a cold, I have 20 choices for cold medicines. I vote for president. I've got this duh and that duh. And I'm going, which duh do I vote for? And people say, well, it's the lesser of two evils. I say, well, why don't I vote for evil? So the point is, in the local communities, you can really make an impact, folks. But see, it's easy watching some guy blabbing on mainstream media about something and voting and think you did your duty. No, that's the least thing you can do is voting. It's the illusion of authenticity of government. That's what voting is. And listen, folks, here's the key. You're either a slave or a rebel. George Orwell said this: you don't become a conscious human being until you rebel. Why? Because you wake up and say, whoa, everything I've been told is a lie? I mean, have you ever seen the movie They Live, John Carpenter's movie? If you haven't seen it, it really tells there's something weird working underneath everything. And when you put on those Hoffman lenses they do in the movie, they see the truth. And it's about money. Money is God. And that's how those people think in Washington, D.C. I'm sorry, folks. There are things I've seen. Listen, have you ever heard of Mount Weather in Washington, D.C.? They have their own escape thing. They go to Mount Weather right outside of Washington, D.C. If the catastrophe, it has shopping centers. It even has its own office of the presidency. It has armed guards. They all go hide in there. But whoa, wait a second. I paid with that with my tax dollars, but I don't have a place I can go hide. They go hide. They don't think anything about us because the psychopathic nature is you don't care about people at all. You care about yourself and your money and your possessions.
Yeah. Now, here's a question for you that I don't completely understand, but you might. How does an ordinary person identify the difference between actual law and color of law when being confronted by authorities?
Well, you got to know the law. And what I tell people say to me, well, okay, when I meet law enforcement officers and get to know them a little bit, I always ask them, I say, what law are you enforcing? They look at me and I go, it's called the Constitution, man. You're supposed to obey the Fourth Amendment, unreasonable search and seizures. You're supposed to obey the Second Amendment because we have a right to own firearms. You shouldn't be busting through my doors. I have a right to carry a sign on the street, not block somebody or something, to protest. In fact, I had a fellow that we give out a Bill of Rights pamphlet. He was protesting on a street corner. The two cops showed up and said, all right, buddy, off the street corner, what are you doing there? And he goes, let me read the First Amendment to you. And he read the First Amendment about them being able to gather together and petition the government for redress. They went, oh, okay, redress agreement. Okay, go ahead. They drove off. Like, it was like Jesus giving them a Bible verse,
cops. Well, okay, where is the line between needed law enforcement in emergencies and the police state? For instance, if there's mass violence that's out of control, when do you feel it's right to use the military? And if it ever is, how does the government put the genie back in the bottle?
Well, you have to have good local police, and I agree that defunding the police is not a good idea. I don't agree with that. I think you need good local police who live in their communities and know each other. A lot of your large cities, the police don't even live there. They live in other states. They travel in. And what I would do is completely rearrange that if I was the mayor, take over, make the police live in the neighborhoods. You should know your local police by name, by the way. Get back to that model, and you're going to be able to deal with the police. I mean, they're going to work with you in the community. And you're going to need sometimes, if there is a riot, the local governor or whatever can call on the National Guard that's needed. But the problem, as I've seen with some of these riots, is when you have maybe 200 protesters and you have 2,000 cops, state troopers and National Guard there, and they're watching, and again, they stand by and watch it now. They've done it in a number of instances, people getting beat up, stores getting brought. They're not local people. They're not local cops. They don't give a hoot what happens there. They don't go shop at those stores. And see, change the nature of the police, and that's going to take a while. But you can do it in your local community, and it's not going to be someone me saying, go do it. You're going to have to do it. It's your job. It's your local community, and it's your children you want to protect, by the way, in the future.
And this viewer has an interesting question. What is a police officer's obligation to follow orders that they know are unconstitutional? What can they do if they get an order they know is illegal to resist enforcement without losing their career?
They may lose their career. And there are a number of good cops now, sheriffs across the country are saying, we're not going to do this. They've done it. They've stopped. We're not going to take away everybody's guns. We think it's unconstitutional. They're getting together in groups, and that's the way to do it. and working together to do that. And no policeman with ethics should enforce anything that violates the Constitution. No. They should not be pulling up in front of your house with stingray devices in their cars, downloading the information off your cell phone, whatever. That's unreasonable search of your home. It's not.
Only the NSA can do that. Only the NSA can do that, right, John?
Well, NSA should. None of these people should be doing that. I mean, they use 9/11 and this terrorism fantasy to do everything. Okay, rounding up the Brandon Robb fellow because he didn't like Obama's executive orders. He's a 9/11 truther. This is stuff that governments make up. This make work stuff that they do. And they want to look like we're saviors or something like this. And they're not. When you're putting away 1.5 million a year people in mental hospitals like they did in the old Soviet Union, we're down the wrong road, folks. We're moving into a bad horror movie.
Do you think 9/11, raising the truth about 9/11, the alarm among the population is vital to turning all this around?
Yes, I think we need to talk about what we see, what's right, and raise questions. What did James Madison say? I go back to the great quote: "We ought to mistrust all those in power." If you trust anybody in power, go back to the 1950s. See, and here's another thing, and I didn't get to talk about this, but have you ever heard of Project Paperclip? The FBI brought in thousands of Nazi scientists and intelligence people. Reinhard Gehlen, one of Hitler's chief intelligence agencies, helped set up the CIA. Most people don't know that. Those are all facts. That's not anything conspiracy. And when you had the 1950s where they were busting through people's doors because they had viewpoints, I mean, Pete Seeger, the great folk artist, was a friend of mine. They pulled him before the Un-American Activities Committee because he was singing songs about the bad government. And he was smart. He quoted the First Amendment, by the way. And so that's where it's at. I mean, they're going to go after anybody that's going to speak truth to power. They don't like that. You're either a slave or a rebel. And the question I would ask people, Orwell said it best: you don't become conscious until you rebel. Do you want to go to death as a zombie or a rebel? Folks, I prefer going as a rebel.
Excellent. Me too. I'm with you all the way. And I think all our viewers are as well. And we're deeply inspired by the specifics that you have given us. I mean, you've armed us with all these things that are happening. This is, and you've labeled it as as a kind of a definition of the deep state, and it's given me personally a much wider view of what we're up against. We know what they did, on 9/11, but what they've been doing since 9/11, what you've given us today, arms us to speak to people about 9/11 as well. And who are these perpetrators? Well, this is what they're doing. You know them by their fruits, and you've shown us some really bad fruits today. We're so grateful to you, John. Thank you. I wish you could stay longer and answer more questions, but I know you got to run. Any final thoughts you might have for us before we let you go?
Listen, I just said it maybe a little bit here. If you have children or grandchildren and you want a future for them, really get involved locally in your city governments, your public schools. Make them teach the Bill of Rights. Make them read Orwell's book. Things that they don't get now. Get them educated on the reality of life and not just being education zombies that'll watch mainstream media and sit there and that'd be it. And teach them to be rebels. And there are people out there that will help them. There are people like me. There are not a lot of them, but there are people out there who will do their best to help them. And if you give us a call and you run into any problems, if we can fight them back, we'll sure as hell do it.
You're awesome, John. And let us know if there's anything we can do to help you. We'll speak anywhere to any group of people, AE 9/11 Truth, and we'll give them the evidence. If you want some evidence to back up your claims, right as they are, about 9/11 being not as what we were told, much different, just let us know. We'll be there for you, brother.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. You take care. Bye.
Take care.